Dr. Wesley Howard, and I'm giving a series of talks here called Hope for Health. And the reason is I'm interested in subjects that people want to know about or anxious about because they might impact their... 2 months from now, I'm going to do Alzheimer's. Next month, I'm going to do type 2 diabetes. But basically, this group of lectures are about felt issues. And I'm going to talk about diet wars today. The reason I'm going to do it diet wars is because it is a very controversial thing. And I'm going to mention some controversial subjects. Forgive me, but that's what this is about. So this is a talk about the controversies and the confusion in our culture about diet. And I'm going to talk about a number of different levels. And this subject has far too much content to be able to talk about it in an hour. So I'm going to hit on a number of things. And if I hit on something you want to know more about, just ask me later on, or we can go into it with other things. I am, after putting this lecture together, I'm thinking of talking about gluten someday because it's a big subject and it's too big to mention in this. So are there really diet wars going on? I don't see people throwing rotten tomatoes and rotten eggs, and I haven't found anybody on the side of the road bloody and dead because they were part of a diet war. But obviously, they're at different levels. There are diet wars going on in our culture. People get hot and bothered. They may argue with each other, but there are different levels to the diet war. One is simply, we have different tastes. I like hamburger, you like lettuce. Okay, we could get hot and bothered about that. It's interesting, we're living in a culture where people get hot and bothered about a lot of things. Some of those are big things, some of those are seemingly inconsequential, but there's cultural taste. So obviously you'd expect people to not agree, and look at people all don't agree. I happen to be very strongly opinionated about some things you'll see, but when it comes to the bottom line, whatever you want to do is fine with you, and I don't have to suffer your consequences, I suffer mine. But as far as I'm concerned, I'm not out to change anybody unless I can change their understanding of truth. Now, here's a basic question. Is diet important? How important is diet? How important is what you eat? Well, the way we live, you would think, not that important. People kind of just do what they want to do. But diet is the most important thing in your health. How do we know that? Well, epidemiologically, these scientists that do the studies and look and what affects what. This is a busy slide, so don't focus in too much on it, but I've shown this one before. If you look at the risk factors for death and the risk factors for disability, and you stack those up, 40, 50 years ago, smoking, tobacco was the #1 risk factor for death in the United States. Now, diet is the #1 risk factor for death and disability. If you take everybody that dies, everybody that's disabled, diet is the #1 contributor to that. Now, smoking is, physical inactivity, alcohol abuse, other things like that are risk factors, but diet trumps everything else. Diet is the most important thing in your health. Even if we strongly disagree about it, it's still #1. Okay, this is a busy slide, but it basically says 70, 80%, 70, 90% of American chronic non-communicable diseases are diet related, are environmental factors, they say. If you look down here, that's the thing we can do something about. So these talks are aimed at helping people understand, if you're worried about your health in the future, you're not a pawn, you're not a passive person who floats down a stream. You're somebody who's in charge of your own destiny to some great degree, much more than our society would like to tell us. Okay, are there vested interests behind the diet wars? You better believe it. If you don't know, you're about to be shown some of those things. vested interests. In other words, forces that would like not to be seen behind the scenes, but are very powerful as far as what we eat and what our health is. The tobacco companies back in 1950s were very powerful. Why? Because nobody knew or nobody thought that tobacco caused cancer. The tobacco companies were big, and the American belief, at the core of the American belief, is the right to make money and be successful. I'm not against that. It's just that that's too big a thing, and that under the tobacco companies, even the doctors, you go to the doctor would tell you if you have a scratchy throat, go buy this brand of cigarettes. That's what I smoke, and that's what you should try. So there were vested interests during the tobacco company years. And this, what happened, what it took to get rid of this influence was the government beginning to turn against the tobacco companies. It took 7,000 clinical studies before the Surgeon General of the United States said, you know what, smoking is not a good idea. And when the consensus switched and the government and a lot of other forces turned against the tobacco companies, that's when the end began, and we dropped smoking significantly. But the tobacco companies, recognizing the handwriting on the wall, bought the food companies up. Guess what? The food companies are now the biggest influencer of our health. Who influences what goes on your plate? If you look at this, McDonald's spends $1.4 billion. 2014, the top 25 food industry advertisers spent almost $15 billion influencing you to buy their product because they wanted to make you happy and make their investors happy. And what has happened, we have become a culture fed with junk food. Okay, junk food is not the only source of problem, but believe me, it's a big source. Another one, now, often what happened is like the Coca-Cola company, recognizing the handwriting on the wall, again, creates these little entities, the front organizations, to fight obesity. And so they name themselves some nice, benign sounding thing, and they're out there marketing against obesity. Well, at the same time, with the other hand, they're helping create it and they're helping fight it. So we have a very crazy system. The government also tells us what we should eat, which is mostly fruits and vegetables, but then it subsidizes meat and dairy, almost 74%. This is back in, I don't know what year this is, 2005. But we have huge investments by the powers that be, government, industry, probably the pharmaceutical, probably the medical industry, funding the very thing that's creating our diseases. So are we interested in getting healthy as a culture? Actually not. It would be a loss of money, because after all, broccoli and soybeans don't have a vested interest to go out and market. Did you watch the Super Bowl? I don't see any broccoli commercials on Super Bowl. Okay, so there are obviously vested interests, but there are also at the core of this, underneath it all, are ideological foundations. And what are those? The last time I gave this, the guy told me I misspelled ideological, so I went through and fixed them all. People are fed by the food industry, which pays no attention to health, and are treated by the health industry, which pays no attention to food. So we have forces, food industry, health industry, that completely ignore each other. Okay, is this because they're ignorant? No, because they're in the same game together. Why is it that we're not curing type 2 diabetes? We know how to cure it. Right. We're making tons of money. Why is it we're not curing ischemic heart disease? There's more money to be made if we don't cure it than if we cure it. That's basically it. It's an ideological conflict. Now, there are no bad foods, the American Dietetic Association. Now, Read what's on that slide and tell me what the logical inconsistency is. Can you pick it up? It's an ideological issue that is right there on the page. If there are
I was
no,
going to say eat right.
eat right. If there are no bad foods, how can you eat right? Eat right implies you know what you should eat and what you shouldn't eat. Well, if there are no bad foods, there's nothing bad. Why? How could you choose good and bad? We don't like those words, good and evil. Are there foods that are bad for you? You better believe there are. Are there foods that are good for you? You better believe there are. So therefore, there are plenty of good and plenty of bad foods. If you want to eat right, there have to be good and bad foods. But if the American Dietetic Association says there's no bad foods, then eat, drink, and be merry. Tomorrow we die. Ideological conflicts. Okay. Now, the tobacco companies recognized if they were losing the battle, they could still buy some time by creating doubt. How did they do that? They funded studies that called into question the new emerging belief system, which was against tobacco. And all they had to do was create doubt. You know what? You know, these experts, I'm going to get to eggs eventually, but this year they tell us eggs are good, and next year they tell us eggs are bad. These are the experts. You know what? They're probably paid off by different companies, and I'm not sure anybody really knows the truth. So you end up with doubt. If you're a doubter, what do? What are you going to end up eating? Whatever you want to. So doubt creates an environment where nobody knows, and you just do what you want to do. Do what you're going to do anyway. Okay, so that's an ideological conflict involved in an issue of truth, right and wrong. Now, there's lots of gray areas. There's lots of relativism in the area of diet, but it's not so bland that everything is relative. Have you ever gone to a practitioner who says, your body will tell you? Now, you know what? There's a truth to that. Your body does have a sense, but if that's all there ever was, a person's body simply tells them what they need and some people can drown with that kind of philosophy. There's a place for that. I'm not saying I'm totally agnostic about that, but doctors should know, or practitioners should know, what is good and what is not good. It has to be tweaked and applied to each individual. But okay, so we sometimes end up with a hedonistic bottom line, which is basically do what you want to do, whatever makes you feel good. Eat, drink, and be merry. I love food. I eat what I want, when I want, where I want. Somehow I'm still thin. Not everyone has to watch what they eat to stay small. Sometimes it just happens. Okay, that's a fairly nihilistic. And of course, what's interesting is in the present ideological conflict, we're going to get back to the Bacon, Brie, and Butter Club fights back.
Oh, goodness.
And John
Bacon wrapped butter.
Bacon wrapped butter.
It looks
Okay,
awful.
and John McDougall in California says, we like good news about our bad habits. So we'll get into this in the end. I'm going to hit the sugar versus fat conflict because that's at the heart of doesn't that look good? Oh, I used to love bacon, brie, and butter. Okay. The only way forward has to be founded on science. Okay, there are scientific skeptics that think that science has become so subjective, it's become so serving of interest groups. You know what, that's true. But science has to be the way forward. Science is objective. Science is really hard, it's really rigorous, it's really confusing at times. Cholesterol is so confusing. Man, I tell people that get confused by cholesterol, just put cholesterol aside, and actually the answers are really simple if you get all the confusion out of your brain. How do you distinguish between different diets? I'm just going to go into this a little bit. If we want to look at diets and say some diets are better than others, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that, but how do you divide up diets? I mean, there's a million kinds of diets. One of the ways it's typically done, it's very easy, is the old carbs, protein, and fats. Carbs, protein, and fats are units of content for different foods, you never find a pure carb, a pure protein, a pure fat. We talk about that. Where do you want to get your protein from? Well, that means they're thinking about meat or animal products. But you take a steak, most of steak's calories are fat, not protein. And steaks have a little bit of carbohydrate in them. But this is a good way to start, because what you can do is you can talk about what we often talk about: low carb, high fat, or high fat, low carb, or protein centered diets. And that's one way to divide it up. Let me just give you John McDougall's picks 4 diets. It's not so much to focus on these as much as notice that he's doing a high fat, low fat, low carb, high carb from one end to the other. So this is the high fat, low carb. That's the low carb, low fat, high carb. And the two extreme, he calls these extreme diets. The Eskimo diet, people that lived on the North Pole. Well, they don't have a lot of plant stuff. About 2 months of the year they have berries and stuff like that. But the rest of the year they have nothing but whale and seal and blubber and meat. That's all they eat. So they are an extreme diet. It used to be, with Weston Price and other ones like that, they became enamored that the Eskimos were a healthy group of people. And there were a couple people from the Scandinavian countries, scientists that went up there and certified them and said, you know, these people are really healthy. Actually, they never really looked until later on they found out these people are terribly sick. They have terrible atherosclerosis. They have the highest rate of colon cancer in the world, and they have osteoporosis and they die at a young age. We actually have fossilized, frozen people from this group of people. One is 1,000 years old and one is 500 years old. Both had terrible atherosclerosis. The Maasai are also similar in this kind of. Now on the other end is Walter Kempner from Germany that came to Duke University and established the rice diet. Right. The rice diet was, he said, I want to design a diet that's high in carbohydrates, low in fat, and low in protein. And so he came up with a white rice, fruit juice, and table sugar, and that was his extreme diet of high carbohydrate, low protein, low fat. And he would cure people with hypertension, cure people with diabetes, cure people with renal disease. Now, John McDougall says he only puts people who are dying on that diet. But anyway, these are two extremes. What I wanted, and notice that it's high fat, low carb, and low fat, high carb. These are really the two authentic extremes of the diet parameters. And notice he has the American diet, which is pretty high fat and, moderate carbohydrate. And then McDougall's, his is a whole food plant-based diet. The American diet, the standard American junk food diet, is what? It's 63% processed foods. That's the worst part of it right there.
So how do you define processed food?
It's anything that's been taken from its natural state and something good has been taken out or something bad has been added. That's Michael Greger's definition. So there's oils. Now, forgive me for those of you who love oils. There are no oils that are essentially healthy. They're all processed foods. Okay, olive oil is looked on as the paradigm of health. It's not. Okay, so sweeteners, obviously, and then flour and cereal. And then you have dairy, 11%, meat, eggs, and nuts, 18%, and then fruits and vegetables. The standard American diet, half of that is French fries and ketchup. The rest of it is actually real fruits and vegetables. So this is a pretty abysmal diet, and it has created the abysmal medical condition we have in our country. And notice that this is, if you say, is this high fat, low carb, or is it low fat, high carb? Actually, it's high fat, high carb. High fat, high processed carbs, which is about the worst you can do, and high animal intake. This is a little thing. Go from complex to simple. This is a little diagram I have developed. It's nothing original. It's nothing highly insightful. But when I am working with a person that does not know anything about how do you eat, how do you shop, have them take a piece of paper, big, and I had, draw a line down the middle. On the left side, put animal foods. On the right side, plant foods. Okay, and then we might actually walk through a grocery store and say, okay, is this animal? Is this plant? Is it animal? Is it plant? I mean, it's obviously beef is animal, but you get to poultry and fish. I mean, especially dealing with a Filipino, fish is like, it's not meat, is it? or crustaceans or shellfish or things like that. But anything that comes from an animal, even milk, eggs, cheese, butter. Some people don't think butter is from animals, okay? Everything else is on the other side, plants, okay? Now, today one of the worst foods in the food world, worst words in the food world is carbs. If I work with a type 2 diabetic, carbs. Carbs are my enemy. Okay, well, carbs are actually not the problem. They're the symptom of the problem. The real problem is saturated fat. But over here on this side, plant foods are highly carb foods. Okay, but carbs are not all bad. Carbs can become bad. You can take a carb that's good and you can make it bad by processing it or engineering it. So what I do is I divide this up into the top part is refined or engineered. Anytime you take a plant, for instance, taking wheat, there was a time in the past when we didn't know how to refine wheat. So wheat would be milled into a usable form, and then it would start to go rancid pretty quick, so you had to use it. Couldn't store it very long. So, as Michael Pollan explains, the milling of wheat to where we had flour and germ and bran was actually a revolutionary breakthrough that advanced nutritional science, because then we could actually package this stuff, shelf life, be able to ship it away. Okay, it appeared to be a step forward. It was actually a step forward and two steps back at the same time. White rice, when they started milling white rice from brown rice, beriberi, the disease of the lack of B1, I think it is, became endemic in Asia, and 1 million people died before they recognized. Same with scurvy in England on the ships. The sailors would start getting problems, and that's why they called them limeys, because they found out these limes, if they put the limes and they ate them, they wouldn't get vitamin C deficiency. So you get bad carbs and good carbs. They actually be the same carbs. These are carbs in their natural state, whole food, plant-based. Those are good. The G got cut off in my, and good and bad. So there are good carbs and there are bad carbs. They may be the same carbs, but they've been processed. Okay, so, and if you want to read some fantastic, if you want to read about the generation after the tobacco companies, read Michael Moss's, an investigative reporter, Salt, Sugar, and Fat, how the food giants hooked us. Because once the tobacco companies bought the food companies, they start pouring money into research. Take sugar. What's called the bliss point? Too little sugar, too much sugar, just perfect sugar right here. And you have that sugar hit your tongue, it sets your dopamine receptors, your reward center off, and begins to addict you, just like cocaine. Sugar is almost as addictive as cocaine. So salt, sugar, and fat, those are the perfect 3 for addiction. And so we have a whole bunch of engineered and refined food things that are major on salt, sugar, and fat. Potato chips, all 3. Salt, sugar, fat. Perfect combination. Okay, so that's a guarantee of poor health. The standard American diet is high in animal fat, animal stuff, high in refined carbs, and very low in the very thing that is the source of real health, which is whole food, plant-based. This is the American diet, standard American diet. Oh, it looks delicious. If you're addicted to it, you'll want more. Okay, let me just highlight a little bit, not adequate to its value, but the paleo diet and the whole food plant-based. Paleo is all the rage these days. And here's the philosophy behind the paleo diet. Let me skip forward to something that the paleo diet is really a reformation of the Atkins diet, but it's along a very special line. And it's the idea that if you ate like your ancestors, you'd be healthier. So there's much debate about whether we actually eat like our ancestors. There's anthropologists say, this is just a made-up thing because the hunters-gatherers, the hunters would run after wild meat, and wild meat is very hard to get. They didn't eat much of that. Early man was primarily a plant eater, but lean game meats and organ meats are very much at the center of this. And you find people who are into paleo that are big time into meat. Again, we like good news about our bad habits. But if a person goes from American standard American diet to a paleo diet, it will oftentimes bring some benefits. They may lose weight. They may get healthier. They may benefit from a lot of different things. It includes vegetables, particularly root vegetables, fruits, but it also includes oils, nuts, fish, lean game meats, and eggs. Okay, it excludes dairy because the philosophy is we didn't have dairy cows millions of years ago, so we shouldn't be eating milk, cheese, or butter. I don't think probably they have butter in there. Okay, grains. They think, we didn't have agriculture back then, so we didn't have grains. Grains are in a bad way in this culture anyway. So grain-based foods, which is unfortunate. This is one of the biggest unfortunate things is legumes or beans. They exclude beans. All the blue zones are big on beans, and beans are an essential ingredient to health. The reason they exclude those is because they have certain what are called anti-nutrients that even as you cook them, most of those are gone. Right. So there are real reasons for not liking them. Extra sugar, that's good. If you reduce sugar, you're going to be healthier. I am on the sugar bandwagon, but not the exclusive sugar. Nutritional products of industry like refined fats, refined carbohydrates, and processed foods. So people can go on a paleo diet and get healthier, and that's good, as long as they get healthier. Here's a schematic that shows what they like. Wild game meats. You can even find catalogs where it can tell you how to order wild, rare game meats. Not many people can afford that. Over here, the unfortunate things are grains and beans. Grains are very controversial in our culture. Carbs are bad, and grains are seen as bad, partly because of Grain, Brain, and Wheat Belly, those books. But the nutritional research in the past, as a body of information, does not say that grains are intrinsically bad for human beings. I know there's a lot of strong disagreement about that, but grains and beans are the two primary sources of fiber. And grains, if they are not processed or destroyed, they're actually good for you. Now, there are people that cannot take gluten. Clearly there are. But there's also a huge group of people that are gluten sensitive that probably do not fundamentally have problems with grains. I think I'm going to give a talk about that because the whole Roundup, leaky gut, gluten sensitivity, the whole thing comes in. But beans are definitely something that are valuable. So, okay, so the paleo diet has much more whole foods in it, some oils, some eggs. So it is a step in the right direction. Okay, obviously you've been around long enough, you know that I believe that we should not just eat superfoods, but all the foods we eat should be superfoods because, plant-based is the way people should eat. Now, this is, in a sense, this is totally crazy. What group of people has ever eaten totally plant-based? Almost none. You look at the blue zones, there's only one in the Seventh-day Adventist in Loma Linda. The others eat some animal-based stuff. Okay, so if you eat a little bit of animal-based, the problem is obviously not eating a little, but pigging out on too much. That's the problem. So in order to dial back to health, we have to be maybe extreme. So whole food, plant-based diet is basically unprocessed plants in their natural state. When I take a person who doesn't understand this, you take them like about whole foods, and you start with the produce, plants, vegetables, fruits, nuts, grains, all the bulk stuff, like all the different lentils, all the different fruit, spices, herbs and spices. And you can never exhaust this box, without even getting into the other one. So is it this stark? Well, maybe not, but sometimes with certain people you have to say look at this, it's either life or death. Okay. Now, I don't know if any of you have heard of Brenda Davis. She's a dietitian from Canada, and I've been into her lately, and she is really solid. And this is a slide that I love because you know what? The science is very complicated. If you deal with scientific issues, you can't help but sometimes just get overwhelmed, especially if you talk about diet. Can you imagine doing these huge studies where there's thousands and thousands of people and all these variables? It's like, how do you figure these things out? And no, David Katz, who says, fools and I'm not going to get this quote right. Fools and fanatics are always 100% certain what they believe. It's the people in between that are wise who still have some questions. So we will always have some questions, but what's interesting, if you step back from the heat of the discussion, sometimes the solutions are hanging there right in front of you. And I'm going to show you a few of those. It's very interesting that and this is one of the talks I want to give, the proof from different dimensions towards a plant-based diet. And here are some of those very briefly. One is the gut biome. Is your microbiome happy? This is obviously all the rage of science right now. Your gut bacteria. Now, it's not just your gut bacteria, it's the organisms that colonize you all over. We are a symbiotic relationship. What is the number one food for your gut biome that makes it happier than anything else? There's one thing that if you don't feed it, it's not in good shape. And if you do feed it, it's probably the main thing it needs. Anybody know?
Complex carbohydrates?
Fiber, yeah. Yeah, complex carbohydrates, which are the source of fiber. Fiber is what your gut bacteria absolutely must have to be healthy. And guess what? If we eat, and fiber comes only from plants, doesn't come from animals.
Right.
No animal food has any fiber in it, unless somehow they put it in there. And the refining and engineering plant foods takes the fiber out. So it's not uncommon for an American to eat 5 grams of fiber. Africans are eating 150 grams a day.
Are they?
Yeah, some of them do. They have 3 or 4 or 5 bowel movements a day. They eat so
Right.
much heavy plant-based material
Right.
that they, okay.
Well, they
so
use the stalks too.
yeah,
Like,
they eat stuff that we
away
wouldn't
that
yet even
stuff.
touch.
Yeah, right.
But fiber is what you must have. Beans and grains are the primary. If you don't eat beans and grains, you're going to have a hard time getting fiber. I'll get a little medical with you. The number of bowel movements people have tells you how much fiber they're taking care of. One time in the ER years ago, I took care of a woman who told me she had a bowel movement every month. I thought, her mouth probably sees no fiber whatsoever. I don't know where she gets that one bowel movement. But it's funny, people that have worked with people and started helping them, they come back and say, I have this problem. I've started going to the bathroom every day. Am I getting sick? No, you're getting healthy. Isn't it terrible? Okay, the blue zones. Sardinia, Italy, Ikaria, Greece, Okinawa, Japan, Nicoya Peninsula, Costa Rica, and Loma Linda, California. These 5 diverse cultures that all produce regularly people up into their hundreds who are healthy and vigorous and active. And what do they find out about them? Lots of things, 9 things in general, but the thing we're interested in is all these diverse cultures were primarily plant-based. 95% of what they ate was plants. Now, this is not because they didn't have the option to eat animals. Sardinia and Ikaria are shepherds. They take care of sheep and lamb and goats, probably. So they obviously had the meat right there. They thought it was a waste of money to kill these animals and eat them. They would sell them and buy grain. Now, it doesn't mean they didn't eat some. They ate some. They ate some yogurt, some milk, some cheese, but very little. And their cultural process of how they lived dictated to all these 5 groups. We don't eat a lot of that stuff. Obviously, Okinawa, Japan, they had fish, but 1 to 2% of what they ate was fish. Not 67% was purple sweet potato. And then up here, the Seventh-day Adventists are totally plant-based. So we know that plant slant, what they called it, is a characteristic. In fact, the new rage of high fat, the good fats, there is not a long-living culture in the world that's ever been found that ate a high-fat diet. That's just categorically true. I had a man earlier that was all hot and bothered about. Okay, whole food, plant-based is primarily, and the studies do not show. Now here's the way I would take it as a practitioner. If you have something like ischemic heart disease or type 2 diabetes, especially ischemic heart disease, because the only thing ever been shown to reverse heart disease is a totally plant-based diet. The sicker you are, the most strict you need to be. The healthier you are, but make sure you're actually healthy and not apparently healthy, then you can enjoy some fine white bread or whatever, bagels or whatever. Now you can get whole wheat bagels or a little bit of animal stuff. In the Old Testament, they used to fast and they used to feast. Feasting was rich fat and bone marrow and stuff like that. So you can fix that into your diet as long as you're. Now here's heart disease, and this is a friend of Cole Esselstyn's, who a surgeon, I think he was 42, had no risk factors, had crushing chest pain, was doing surgery. Turned out he had a lesion in his left main, LAD, that could not be bypassed or stented, and he refused to take statins. He went on a whole food, plant-based diet. 32 months later, he completely opened up his arteries. So here's the studies. The studies show that heart disease is a nutritional disease. It's caused by what you eat. If you eat the standard American diet, you have one, and you don't change. In fact, sadly enough, so this is some people that have never been told. What have they been told about their nutrition? Some of them have been told nothing. Don't eat fried food. I've had patients, when I was an ER doctor, I had a patient with a heart attack, I'd say, tell me what they told you. Don't eat fried food. That's it. That's all they told you. Don't eat fried food. Man, talk about a death sentence. Okay, 67% recurrence. Mediterranean diet, which is become the standard of the medical culture. They love the Mediterranean diet, a 25% recurrence of heart disease. A whole food plant-based diet, proven by Dean Ornish in 1990, and practiced by Cole Esselstyn, will 82% of Dean Ornish's refers to it and actually open up their arteries. So this is the way to go if you have ischemic heart disease. And as Michael Greger says, if that's all a healthy plant-based diet could do, reverse heart disease, the #1 killer, 1/3 of people in our culture will die of this disease. We know what causes it. We know what can reverse it. If that's the one thing that a whole food plant-based diet does, then that should be the default diet for everyone. Now, am I crazy? I think everybody will do this. No, I'm not crazy. I know everybody won't do it. Most people will not do it. But this ought to be the recommendation. Because as he says, if it reverses your heart disease, it'll reverse your diabetes, your hypertension, a lot of your stuff. Okay, a lot of your GI things, a lot of your arthritis. Okay, and it ought to be the #1 thing that is at least offered. Whole food, plant-based. I like this one. The food you eat can either be the safest and most powerful form of medicine or the slowest form of poison. And 6 years ago, as a standard American doctor, I was converted from the power of Western medicine, which is extremely powerful, to the more powerful lifestyle medicine, which says it doesn't matter what Western medicine can do, you can do better with your fork and spoon. You are more powerful for your future health than anything they can do. Diagnostically, I still think they're the best, although they're too good. They overdiagnose a lot of people. Okay, take the egg, for instance. Oh, lots of controversy about the egg. This year they're good, next year they're bad. What's the issue? How could eggs be bad? Eggs and milk, they're white. Well, maybe that's a racist comment. Anyway, but they're white and they look so clean. They have such a great image. How could they be bad for you? And all the commercials are happy hens, tasty eggs. Notice if you look closely at any of the commercials, they are not allowed to say anything about nutritious or healthy because in fact they're not nutritious and they're not healthy. What's the evidence of that? This is the hard facts, Michael Greger, that the consumption, the amount of cholesterol found in a single egg a day appears to cut a woman's life short as much as smoking 5 cigarettes a day for 15 years. And then Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine, eggs are responsible for prostate cancer, diabetes, colon cancer, cardiovascular health. So here's the point. It's in egg nutrition, cholesterol and saturated fat. That's the two problems, cholesterol and saturated fat. But for some people, cholesterol and saturated fat are not a problem. Uh-oh, the diet wars come back. The egg war is not about taste, it's about truth. It's not about personal preference. And if saturated fat and cholesterol are good for you, then eggs are good for you. Wait a minute. Saturated fat and cholesterol are good for you? Where'd that come from? That came from the fat-sugar war going on in our culture. If you're not aware of this, wake up. This is the big one right now. What was demonized in the past? Fat. Which empire is striking back? Sugar. Sugar is now the new culprit, the new bad one. This is the ideological roots of our present diet war. Sugar versus fat. Okay, fat was demonized, and now fat is fighting back, and sugar is being demonized. Now, and this is part of it. 1984, cholesterol is bad, fat's bad. 2000 something, I don't know what it was. Butter's back, bacon's back. The empire strikes back. This is a culture war. It's a culture war. It has to do with money. It has to do with vested interests. It has to do with science. Science is being bought to pay for this. The war on delicious. Remember when bacon was declared a cause of cancer? I saw a few posts. I'm going to eat 3 times as much bacon because I love the taste of bacon. I can't live without bacon. Okay. Gary Taubes, I heard him when he was here in Charlottesville, the case against sugar. Robert Lustig, Joseph Mercola, who are some of the, Mark Hyman. It's all about the good fat, okay? Good fat is what you need. Joseph Mercola says his diet is 50 to 83% fat. I'll do a talk on fat sometime. Rebecca's used to have this up. It's all about the good fat.
Our store here in Charlottesville?
Yeah, well, they used to, yeah.
That
Their paradigm is
Yeah.
paleo. Their paradigm
Now
is
it
very
is,
paleo.
yeah.
The great cholesterol myth, the empire strikes back. Cholesterol is not bad for you. In fact, the more cholesterol you eat, the healthier you'll be. Okay. Sugar is bad, fat is good. Is that true? Well, actually, no. Sugar is bad and fat is bad. That's what I believe. Too much sugar, refined sugar, is bad. The closer you get to refined sugar, all the processed and engineered stuff is terrible for you. We should cut down on that. But you know what? The fat is not good for you either. So both of them are bad. What do we need? Carbs are, unprocessed carbs are the way to get healthy. Okay, life expectancy would grow by leaps and bounds if green vegetables smelled as good as bacon. That's part of the problem, just our taste buds. We should all be eating fruits and vegetables as if our lives depend on it, because in fact they do depend on it. Fiber, phytonutrients, antioxidants, these are things that come from plants. That's where our health comes from. The more plants you eat, the Mediterranean diet is healthier because it has more plants in it, not because of the olive oil and the fish. Okay, it's because it's high in fruits and vegetables. Here's a guy who likes to make it simple, and his simplification is actually very good with some cautions. Just don't make moderation grow to where it's a major thing. Eat food. What does he mean? Eat food? Don't eat food-like substances. If your grandmother would not recognize it as food, don't eat it. Okay, that's a very wise thing. Michael Greger is one of these guys who can take all this complicated stuff and make some very, like Michael Greger, make some very pithy statements. Eat food, not too much, don't stuff yourself, mostly plants. So if people simply did this, we would be a lot healthier. It's the same thing that Michael Greger's saying. So end your diet war, give in to truth and health, and come to love it. The key of living this way is not feeling like you're being denied,
Right.
or you're having to miss something. You know, the thing is, you could celebrate and eat bacon every once in a while. You know, we've been this way for 6 years, and when people offer us stuff we used to love and die for, now we say, please, I don't really want that. We 2 Thanksgivings ago, we did the turkey and all that stuff. After eating that, we thought, man, I know I don't eat that stuff anymore. Love the food that loves you back. Love the food that loves you back. Come to love it. Okay, the end of diet wars. So that is, let me turn the lights on. That is